Hi, welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this tutorial episode, I am going to show you how to create the dark decaying wood texture. Now I'm using the texture to create a sandstone cliff as the background on my bighorn sheep artwork. So obviously the texture can be used in different ways. Well, let's get started. Basic techniques. I will be referring to this texture as dark sandstone. The texture is created by burning bands or lines of color. The bands should vary both in thickness and darkness levels. To alter or change the thickness of a burn stroke, just increase or decrease how much metal is in contact with the wood. Using the flat of the shader will produce thicker burn results. Increase the angle that you hold the pen tip and less metal will be in contact with the wood. This produces thinner burn strokes. Another way to alter the width of the burn stroke is by changing which side of the pen tip you use. For example, using the front edge of either pen tip in the lower right corner produces a thinner burn stroke than using the side edge of the pen tips. The pen tip that I am using in the video is called the D shader by Colwood. It has 4 burning sides that are of different sizes: the front edge, the angled short edge, the shorter left edge, and the longer right edge. As I said before, the more metal you have in contact with the wood, the wider the burn stroke will be. With this particular pen tip, the right edge has the ability to produce the widest burn stroke. I have the heat set on my burner to produce a very dark tan or light brown burn result. Once I get the burner adjusted to produce the desired burn color, I do not adjust the setting after that. Instead, I alter my hand speed. Moving my hand quickly across the board produces a lighter color. Slowing down my hand speed produces a darker burn result. Also, reburning and the burn stroke length impact how light or dark the results will be. Obviously, the more times you reburn, the darker the area will become. As for the burn stroke length, shorter burn strokes tend to be darker than longer ones. The reason is that the pen tip is not in contact with the wood for a very long time on the shorter strokes, so there isn't as much heat loss. The extra heat means you can get darker burn results. Use an extremely light hand pressure when burning. Let the pen tip gently glide over the surface of the wood. This will help create a bit of randomness in your burn strokes. Also, vary the direction that the lines or bands of color are burned in. Very few, if any, of the lines I've burned are perfectly straight. Instead, most of them have very slight direction changes. Or if it's easier to visualize, they have very soft or gentle curves in them. I do recommend trying vertical burning. You may find that burning in this direction is easier to do. Regardless of the direction you burn, the process remains the same. Fill the area with lines that vary in length, color, thickness, and direction. I tend to burn in a couple of guidelines first, and then fill in the area between the guidelines. With the dark sandstone texture, I tend to keep the majority of the burn strokes in the brown range. I leave a few tan-colored lines, but mostly as thin accents. The thin tan lines give a lot of shape to the sandstone. You can easily alter the overall color of the sandstone by burning the majority of the lines to a paler color. A green arrow is pointing to an example of where I did this. Make sure to add a few really dark, thin lines to represent small cracks. The more cracks you add, the closer it will make the sandstone seem, so keep the lines to a minimum. Also, if you are creating a lighter colored texture, the cracks should also be lighter in color. Now this is a reminder to use the flat of the shader as you burn. The reason is that this will help keep soft edges on the burn strokes. The softer the edges are, the more out of focus the sandstone will appear. This will help push the sandstone into the background. In fact, the more out of focus the lines on the sandstone are, the further away it will appear. Rough texture hack. To create a rough texture, use a low grit piece of sandpaper, I'm using 100 grit, and gently rub over the board where you want the texture to be. Once done, the board should have a slightly gritty feel to it. It should not be extremely noticeable or feel really rough. Then, use the same burn strokes and techniques that we have been using all along to create the sandstone texture. The only additional information I will give is to tell you that it is very important to use a really light hand pressure when burning over the scuffed wood. This will allow the slightly gritty texture of the wood to show through on the burn marks. Comparisons. Square 1 shows the texture on unscuffed wood. With square 2, I very lightly scuffed the wood as I was experimenting. I ended up liking how the texture looked that way. Square 3 shows how the texture looks being burned on wood that had a little bit more scuffing done to it. Recap. Let's recap the basic process for creating the dark sandstone texture. Burn lines or bands of color that vary in length, width, and color. Allow the lines to gently bend or bow. Basically, this is a way of saying don't burn a bunch of perfectly straight lines that are all parallel with each other. Use a light hand pressure when burning and let the pen tip glide over the surface of the wood. This will allow a little more randomness into your burn strokes. Use the flat of the shader to create burn strokes that have soft edges. This will create texture that appears slightly out of focus. The more out of focus the sandstone is, the further away it will appear. To get a rougher looking texture, use a coarse grit sandpaper and rub it lightly over the board to scuff the surface. Then burn over the scuffed area using a very light hand pressure to produce a rougher looking sandstone texture.